The first interruption hit like a flare through the black. Every public, private, and military channel in known space froze, overridden by the same broadcast. A chamber of burnished silver and deep violet filled the screens, curved walls lined with banners of alien houses. At the center, on a dais of black stone, 12 members of the Vathar Alliance High Council stood in a half-circle, their eyes fixed on the millions now watching. The one at the center, Archlord Severin of the Draelin, was tall and narrow, scales shimmering like oil under a harsh light, his voice cut with the precision of a blade. "By unanimous decree of the Vathar Alliance," he said, "Sol 3, known locally as Earth, is declared unstable, culturally stagnant, and unfit for independent governance. Effective immediately, the human species will be disarmed and reorganized under direct alien supervision." A low ripple of amusement passed through the other council members. It's a mercy, really. They've clung to their obsolete brutality for too long. It's practically folklore at this point. From the far side of the dais, High Strategist Raelith of the Quarmech, his translucent skin revealing slow pulsing veins beneath, let out a slow, guttural laugh. "Do they even remember how to fight? Or is it just bedtime stories now?" The camera panned, showing rows of alien delegates smirking, whispering, exchanging mocking gestures. Every word was carried live through civilian feeds, military comms, school information hubs, and trade channels. In orbit above Titan, in deep mining settlements on Ceres, in naval command centers on Luna, humanity was forced to watch. In a cramped mining mess hall, a group of engineers in oil-stained uniforms stared at the screen, jaws tight. "They really think we're broken." Beside him, another just shook his head and kept his eyes locked forward. On a troop transport adrift between Mars and Jupiter, a row of infantry in gray-blue armor watched in silence. At the front, Sergeant Marcus Hale's hand tightened on the strap across his chest. No one spoke, but the weight in the air was palpable. In a primary school dome on Europa, children glanced nervously between the towering alien faces and the grim expression of the man on the teacher's personal screen. A man sitting alone in a command chair, watching. General Robert Doohan's image had begun to spread even before the council finished reading the sentence. The feeds split, one half still showing the alien dais, the other showing his lined face lit by the glow of tactical displays. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched. Across the system, people leaned forward without realizing it. Severin's voice continued, deliberate and venomous. "For centuries, your kind has been given the benefit of galactic peace. And what have you done? Nothing. You remain erratic, emotional, violent. This will end." They didn't know, couldn't know, that every record they'd ever read about humanity's wars had been stripped bare by the same council that now mocked them. That, over 5 centuries, the stories of Earth's defiance, innovation, and brutality had been buried under propaganda or erased entirely. Human for the first time. In the crowded bridge of the Sol defense carrier Resolute, Captain Alan Mercer watched from behind his command crew. "They're making it official. All those years of pretending they weren't coming." He didn't answer. He knew what was coming next. The council's proclamation ended with a final ceremonial stamp from Severin's obsidian staff. The sentence is passed. The fleets are en route. And then, without transition, the feed shifted. The council chambers vanished, replaced by a grainy, color-drained image. A battlefield suspended above a scarred moon, ships exchanging fire in silence, detonations blooming like flowers of light. The footage sharpened, restored from deep archives, human warships ramming enemy cruisers, boarding pods piercing hulls, shock troops in sealed armor clearing decks room by room. The next sequence was worse, a silent recording of a sabotage run on an alien orbital foundry. 3 human operatives in dark suits drifting in under cover of debris, planting charges, disappearing before the station folded in on itself in a burst of white. Then, a montage of precision orbital strikes, ambushes from shadowed asteroid fields, and surgical assassinations carried out in vacuum suits. It was quiet but suffocating. No triumphant music, no narration. Just history, raw and unfiltered. The final cut held on General Doohan. His hair was silver now, but the stillness in his gaze was sharper than any blade. He leaned forward just slightly, letting the camera take him in before speaking. "You should have checked our archives." The screen went black. Across the galactic public opinion channels, chaos erupted. The Quarmech chatter line was filled with abrupt silences, warriors who'd laughed seconds earlier, now staring at the old footage in disbelief. On the merchant forums of the gentle Lurathi, threads appeared asking whether this was fabricated, because surely no one could fight like that anymore. Among the Shari, whose long lifespans made them slow to change, there were murmurs of recognition. Some remembered serving alongside humans in forgotten wars. On a civilian hub in the Atraxi Belt, a young trader blinked at her feed. "Humans? I thought that was a myth. Like the old swarm." Her partner shook his head slowly. "Not a myth. Not anymore." In a subterranean banquet hall on the Draylen homeworld, Severin himself watched the human broadcast loop on a private channel. His jaw tightened for the first time that day. Back on Luna, in the war room buried deep under the Sol Defense Command spire, Doohan stood before his senior officers. The projection screens still showed split feeds of alien reactions, nervous laughter, arguments, dead silence. He said nothing. The silence was part of the message. 5 centuries of being treated as relics, of being mocked, erased, underestimated. Over in less than 5 minutes of footage, and the fleets already on their way would learn the same truth. In an observation gallery of the Galactic News Corps, a thin, scaled commentator from the Varathi species leaned toward his mic, voice pitched in disbelief. "If even half of that footage is real." He trailed off, swallowing hard. In the mining mess hall on Ceres, the same engineer who'd muttered before now smiled grimly. "Guess they're about to find out." No one in the room disagreed. The feed from Doohan's message had barely faded before the memory of how this war truly began crept back, quiet and sharp, like a knife sliding from a sheath. 5 centuries earlier, the Draylen council chambers had been a theater of cold precision. Under vaulted arches of obsidian and light-veined crystal, Severin had stood before the assembly of allied species, a faint smile playing on his narrow mouth. "They are dangerous," he had said, voice amplified through the chamber's sonic columns. "Not because of their power, but because of their nature. Remove their history, and they become harmless." It wasn't a debate. It was an order. Within decades, every public archive, every shared galactic record that spoke of human victories was either erased or rewritten into parody. Holovids of ancient battles were recast as propaganda. Tactical genius became myth. To the young of other worlds, humanity's most decisive wars were bedtime tales to be met with laughter. The Draylen didn't just hide the past, they sent eyes to watch the future, and those eyes belonged to the Virelians. The Virelians were shapeshifters without a homeworld, their biology an ever-shifting mesh of fibers and mirrored cells. In their native form, they stood tall and narrow, skin like rippled glass catching refracted light. But in the eyes of others, they could be anyone: human miner, Martian dock worker, lunar senator. Their contracts were never for war, but for secrets. The Draylen had paid them more than they had ever been paid before, a centuries-long infiltration of human society. Kalen was one of the first. He'd arrived on Earth in the guise of a refugee from a distant colony. Within 3 years, he was working in a shipyard in New Boston. Within 10, he was godfather to the daughter of his human foreman. By the time a century had passed, Kalen no longer needed to fake the calluses on his hands. Others embedded deeper. Diaren, a brilliant mimic, became a professor at a Ceres Technical Institute, subtly feeding reports on human innovation back to the Draylen. Melik passed as a Martian trade official, his position granting him access to classified shipping manifests and fleet movements. There were Virelians who married humans, raised children, buried friends. They sent their reports on schedule, but the tone began to change. The first fracture came in a meeting on Titan, in the dim back room of a gravity bar that smelled faintly of oil and ozone. Kalen leaned across the table toward Dyron, his human guise flickering just enough to reveal the faint shimmer of his true skin. "You're getting attached," Darren said quietly. Kalen's voice was flat. "No. I'm seeing them for what they are, something you refuse to do." That night, Kalen didn't send his report. The change spread slowly. Some Virelians began speaking to humans not as marks, but as equals. They no longer lowered their eyes in the presence of ranking officers. In the corridors of power, they stopped making themselves smaller, started holding their gaze when challenged. A silent shift, but one that spread like a ripple through still water. Not all approved. Elder Virelians on the Draylen payroll sent warnings. Abandoning the mission was betrayal. Some broke contact with the defectors entirely. But for others, the taste of belonging, of choosing to stay, not because of orders, but because of loyalty, was something their species had never known. It was during a dust storm on Mars that Kalen first told a human the truth. General Edward Mallory, a broad-shouldered man with deep lines around his eyes, stood with his hands clasped behind his back as Kalen, in his true form, hesitated. "They mean to strip you of your fleets, your defenses, your right to stand on your own," Kalen said. Mallory studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Either you're already one of us, or you still don't understand what it means to be human." From that moment, Kalen and others like him began feeding more than warnings. They shared schematics for hybrid camouflage arrays, technology that could bend light and distort mass readings far beyond anything in the Alliance playbook. They offered intelligence on Draylen fleet patterns and political fractures. They didn't just inform, they equipped. Duhan's war room, lit in the dim blue of orbital night, became the center of this unlikely alliance. He stood at the center table with Mallory and Admiral Marcus Trent, listening as Kalen projected a shifting star map. "The Draylen will demand the report. You must give them one," Kalen said. Duhan's expression didn't change. "Then give it to them. Leave out what matters." Trent frowned. "If they know we've got hybrid tech, they won't," Duhan cut in. "They'll see just enough to make them think they've caught us preparing for a fight we can't win." The report went out as ordered. A dossier brimming with half-truths, strategic misdirections, and carefully staged evidence. It confirmed to the Alliance what the Draylen wanted them to believe, that humanity was arming itself in primitive desperation. The reaction was exactly as predicted. Across the galactic core, the most aggressive warrior races, proud of their fleets, hungry for conquest, offered themselves for the strike. The Kreth, with their spiked bone armor and feral war howls. The Vulkor, four-limbed gunners who painted their ships in the blood-red pigment of their homeworld seas. The armored Tarishan, whose cruisers could crush asteroid colonies under their mass drivers. They saw Earth not as an opponent, but as a challenge to be put down swiftly. In the war forums of the Alliance, plans were drawn. Within a month, the order came. 3 massive fleets would depart from distant sectors, converging on the Sol system like a tightening noose. From the shadowed observation deck of the Resolute, Kalen stood beside Mallory, both watching the distant stars. "They think they're coming to destroy you," Kalen murmured. Mallory glanced sideways at him. "And?" Kalen's mouth curved, just slightly. "They're walking straight into the center of a trap." Neither man spoke again. Somewhere beyond that darkness, the fleets were already on the move. The first Alliance warships pierced the heliopause in tight formation, their drives glowing like molten scars in the dark. The Kreth fleet led the charge, hulking cruisers plated in jagged bone, each vessel bristling with kinetic spines that could pierce a moon's crust. Beside them, The Volcor armada advanced in layered diamond formations, their hulls painted in the blood-red pigment of homeworld oceans. Behind, the Terratian carriers lumbered forward, each carrying enough mass-driver ammunition to shatter a continent. They were met by nothing. Sensors swept the outer planets, finding only the faint hum of passive relay buoys and dormant orbital stations. No intercept craft, no missile screens. Communications channels were open, silent, and unencrypted, carrying nothing but the whisper of cosmic static. On the Kreth flagship Vorgash, Warlord Jern clicked his serrated teeth in irritation. "They're cowering!" he snarled to his tactician, a broad-shouldered Volcor named Thazrek. Thazrek's forearms moved quickly across the holo controls. "Then we break the door down!" The fleets pushed inward, passing Saturn's rings without resistance. The Tarashan carriers deployed sensor drones ahead, their slow pulses scanning for hidden weapon platforms. They found nothing but cold rock and long-forgotten mining wrecks. By the time they crossed Jupiter's orbit, the Alliance crews were restless. This was not the glorious strike they had imagined. The human system seemed empty. It happened all at once. From the shadow of Callisto's ice cliffs, 3 ships flickered into existence where space had been bare moments before. Their hulls were a matte, distortion warping black, light bending strangely along their edges. Before the Kreth flagship could lock weapons, the 3 ships split formation, each releasing a scatter of plasma torpedoes into the densest clusters of enemy vessels. The torpedoes didn't detonate immediately. Instead, they split mid-flight into dozens of smaller warheads, each seeking a different target. Volcor gunships were gutted in seconds, their red hulls venting atmosphere into the void. Kreth cruisers shuddered under precise strikes that found engine cores and magazine holds with impossible accuracy. From high above the ecliptic plane, orbital plasma towers hidden in the shadow of captured asteroids came online, spitting superheated bolts into the melee. One Tarashan carrier's forward mass driver was severed cleanly before it fired a shot. Another simply imploded, its gravity stabilizers sabotaged remotely, the sudden collapse folding its bulk inward like crushed paper. Back in the war room, Admiral Marcus Trent's voice was low but steady as he watched the real-time telemetry. "Pattern Delta is holding. All drones on autonomous combat loop." General Duhan gave a single nod, eyes never leaving the unfolding engagement. None of the vessels out there carried a single living crewman. They were remotely piloted decoys, stripped of life support but armed to the teeth. The enemy didn't know, and wouldn't until it was far too late. On the Kreth flagship, Jern bellowed for full assault. But each time the Alliance ships attempted to regroup, gravity wells flared to life in their midst. Localized sabotage fields that tore formations apart. Smaller, unmarked craft darted through the chaos, planting warheads on stragglers before vanishing again into nothing. In under 12 minutes, half the Kreth fleet was gone. The Volcor armada fared no better. Their tightly layered formations made them perfect targets for chain-reactive detonations. A single, precisely placed shot into a forward munitions hold would send sympathetic blasts rolling backward, peeling entire lines of ships into molten fragments. The survivors broke formation, retreating toward the shadow of Jupiter. That was when the human sabotage teams triggered the final phase, remote-controlled debris fields, seeded with gravitic charges. Fleeing ships slammed into invisible walls, their drives shearing from their mounts, their hulls spinning helplessly before silent explosions consumed them. When it was over, the void was filled with drifting wreckage and the frozen arcs of dying plasma streams. No human vessel had been visibly damaged. No signal of triumph was sent. They had no idea. This isn't victory. This is bitter justice. No one around him argued. Out beyond the asteroid belt, the surviving remnants of the Kreth and Volcor fleets limped toward their rendezvous with the Draylen Third Fleet. They carried frantic transmissions of what they'd seen, but half those messages never arrived, intercepted by human counterintelligence or cut short by unexplained detonations aboard the transmitting vessels. In the public networks of the galaxy, the effect was immediate. Shock rippled through neutral worlds and allied systems alike. Clips of the battle, captured by civilian telescopes and leaked military feeds, were replayed in disbelief. Some species accused the footage of being manufactured. Others began privately updating their threat assessments of humanity. The Drelin, however, remained silent. From the command deck of the Vathar Ascendant, Severin listened to the panic of his allies without the faintest change in expression. To him, everything was proceeding exactly as expected. The Kreth and Volkor had always been fodder, blunt weapons meant to strike first and draw fire. Their destruction was not a loss, but a curtain for the real performance. And while the galaxy reeled from the slaughter, the Drelin moved to their second phase. Using the drifting debris of the two annihilated fleets, they deployed stealth drones disguised as twisted hull fragments. Invisible to most sensors, the drones drifted quietly toward human orbital platforms, communication satellites, and navigation buoys. In their bellies, coded programs waited, ready to tear apart command and control systems from within. The humans didn't know it yet, but the next attack wouldn't come from the front. It would come from the shadows already inside their walls. The debris from the annihilated Kreth and Volkor fleets drifted silently through the void, tumbling lazily toward human orbital space. Hidden inside twisted slabs of shattered armor and ruptured hull plating, Drelin infiltration drones lay dormant, their outer shells burned and scored to look convincingly dead. One by one, they crossed into the operating perimeters of Earth's satellite network. The first sabotage came without warning. A navigation relay in high Mars orbit went offline mid-transmission, cutting a whole sector's ships adrift without accurate jump coordinates. Minutes later, a defense satellite near Europa turned its weapons inward, vaporizing two friendly patrol craft before its systems fried in a burst of static. By the time the scope of the infiltration was understood, the damage was already fracturing the system's defenses. Human fleets lost contact between sectors. Squadrons waiting for synchronized warp-in orders received nothing. Some jumped blindly into positions they believed safe, only to find Drelin raiding craft already waiting. Deployed across the system, the drones worked with surgical precision. They injected malicious code into orbital defense platforms, wiped navigation protocols, and triggered false gravitational readings that sent civilian convoys scattering into hazard zones. The humans, forced to operate in isolation, could no longer coordinate the way they had in the first engagements. Back in the war room, Admiral Marcus Trent's voice was sharp over the comm feeds. "We've lost contact with Phobos Command. The relay chain from Neptune inward is unstable. We're getting phantom echoes, and half the return signals are scrambled beyond use." General Duhan didn't look away from the tactical board. "Initiate containment." Trent hesitated. "Sir, without system-wide coordination." "Do it," Duhan cut in, his tone absolute. Containment meant tightening every surviving unit into defensible pockets, even at the cost of leaving sectors exposed. Ships would hold ground instead of chasing kills, slowing the enemy's advance until control could be re-established. For the officers who didn't know about Duhan's deeper plan, it felt like giving up the initiative. In orbit above Mars, the Yamamoto Command Station, humanity's first true space command center, operational since the late 26th century, became a primary target. To the Drelin, its symbolic value was nearly as important as its strategic role. At 0320 UTC, 3 stealth drones drifted close enough to latch onto Yamamoto's hull. They cut through external panels, slicing into the station's spinal data conduit. Security teams intercepted 2, their last transmissions static-laced bursts of gunfire and muffled shouting. The third reached the reactor control nexus. From the ground on Mars, observers saw it happen. A silent bloom of white light that expanded into a halo, then collapsed inward as the reactor imploded. The station's central ring broke in half, its shattered arms spinning away like dying embers. For a few seconds, the comm channels filled with screams. Then silence. Across every human installation, the image of Yamamoto's destruction hit like a physical blow. Veterans of the old colonial wars stood motionless, their faces set as if staring into a grave. Younger officers clenched their jaws, eyes burning with disbelief. The loss was more than tactical. It was ancestral. In the chaos that followed, reports of human casualties in open combat began to arrive. Not drones, not decoys. Actual crews, destroyers boarded by Draylen strike teams, frigates caught in ambushes where retreat wasn't possible. For the first time in centuries, humanity bled in the void. Back in the command bridge, the war room was lit only by the shifting red glow of alert signals. Trent moved to Doohan's side. "We've confirmed losses in the Titan sector. 4 crews gone. If this keeps up..." Doohan didn't look away from the board. "It won't keep up." Around them, junior officers traded uneasy glances. Some whispered that the plan had gone wrong, that the first 2 victories had been luck. Collapse hung unspoken in the air. On the Draylen flagship, Vathar Ascendant, Severin watched the cascade of human failures with the same calm as before. To him, this was the proof of everything he'd argued for centuries, that stripped of their myths, humans were fragile, incapable of weathering a sustained strike. Around him, his bridge officers reported sectors falling dark, human fleets breaking apart. Back in human space, containment lines buckled under pressure. Cut off from central command, local captains made desperate calls, some breaking orders to protect civilian transports, others retreating to fortified positions that would soon be surrounded. The once fluid, coordinated defense had hardened into scattered, static bulwarks. Inside the war room, Doohan's senior staff leaned over the table, voices low. General Mallory spoke first. "We can't keep bleeding like this. If they hit another hub like Yamamoto, morale won't just drop, it'll shatter." Doohan finally looked up, his eyes hard. "Then we make sure they don't." No one else in the room, except the few in Doohan's inner circle, knew that a far greater card was still hidden from play. To the rest, it was just a matter of enduring the storm, if they could. The power grid on Phobos flickered twice, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, Commander Harris Cole pressed his back against the bulkhead, his pulse sinking with the faint vibration of distant impacts. Above them, the Draylen drones had begun their sweep, hundreds of needle-like craft, silent and exact, carving through the moon's surface installations. Ghost Line had been cut off from Central Command for 36 hours. Communications were gone. Navigation data was corrupted. The only advantage they still had was that the Draylen didn't know where they were. Kalen, the Varelian operative whose loyalties had been questioned a century earlier, knelt beside a dismantled control panel, his mirrored skin shifting slowly into a darker, matte form to blend with the shadows. "If we want to take the station back, we can't go through their network," he said. "They'll see every move before we make it." "Then we go around it," Cole replied. He reached into his pack and pulled out a bundle of archaic cables, heavy analog switches, and a palm-sized rotary dial. The equipment looked almost laughably outdated, because it was. Manual override, old as the first Luna colonies. They won't see it coming. The plan was brutally simple. Bypass every compromised system with physical relays, restore the station's core functions one circuit at a time, and use those restored systems to feed false telemetry back to the Draylen drones. In the process, they could sabotage the drones' navigation loops, forcing them into collision paths or out of operational range. The infiltration began in the station's maintenance shafts, narrow tubes where the bulkhead still bore the welding scars of the first Martian expansion. Cole's team crawled in single file, packs scraping the metal. Varelian operatives moved with inhuman precision, their limbs adjusting subtly to the cramped angles. When they reached the first control nexus, a young human officer, Ensign Daniel Ross, spotted a collapsed figure pinned under debris, a Varelian in partial human disguise, blood seeping from a wound along his side. Cole shouted for Ross to keep moving, but the ensign shook his head, ripping his gloves free and dragging the alien out. "You protected us for centuries in secret. Ross said as he braced the injured Varelian against the wall. "Now it's our turn." The Varelian's eyes flickered, the disguise peeling back slightly to reveal the glass-like shimmer beneath. "You're risking everything," he murmured. Ross tightened his grip. "You already did that for us. I'm just paying it back." With the wounded alien in tow, they pressed on. Kalen and Cole worked side by side at the primary junction, manually rerouting circuits. Each time a connection was restored, a new section of the station came back online. First emergency lighting, then the weapons grid, then the drone control interceptors. As the restored systems came to life, Kalen initiated the reverse feed. A pulse sent through the Draylen sabotage network, flipping control signals back toward their origin. Across the sector, hostile drones began spinning out of formation, their sensors overloaded with conflicting orders. Some simply powered down mid-flight, drifting like corpses into the Martian atmosphere. Ghost line to all stations on the old lunar chain. If you can hear this, pass it on. The words traveled not through digital channels, but via a network of buried magnetic relays, forgotten infrastructure from humanity's first permanent settlements off-world. The Draylen had no idea it still existed. Hours later, those relays carried more than Cole's signal. They became the nervous system of a synchronized counterstrike. From the surface of Ganymede to the shipyards above Titan, Varelian agents who had lived for decades as human civilians quietly activated. In a Martian hospital, one reprogrammed life support AI to purge the Draylen sabotage code from the planetary grid. In the scrapyards of Ceres, another pulled a plasma cutter from a pile of junk and carved open a compromised comm tower, replacing its transponder with a deadman loop keyed to human command. The effect was almost simultaneous. Hundreds of sabotage nodes shut down across the Sol system within a span of minutes. Draylen Fleet AI reported cascading failures they couldn't trace. Back aboard the reclaimed Phobos station, Kalen left a small circular emblem on the main tactical console, etched into the metal with a precision laser. It was the crest of the Varelian home clan, a mark not of espionage but of service. When Cole returned to the war room and reported the results, General Mallory studied the synchronized timing of each reactivated station and each neutralized drone. "They were with us the whole time," Mallory said quietly, almost to himself, "waiting for this moment." Outside the reinforced glass of the command deck, the red dust of Mars swirled around Phobos, but the stars beyond looked different now, not like a battlefield closing in, but like open space ready to be taken back. Beyond the orbit of Neptune, space lay in a silence so complete it felt ancient. No drive flares, no comm pings, no patrol sweeps. Just the slow drift of starlight over a black sea. Hidden within that stillness, humanity's true strength slept. 10,000 warships, their hulls wrapped in layers of hybrid camouflage that bent photons, bled heat into nothingness, and warped gravimetric readings until they became background noise. For weeks they had floated here, engines idle, cores cooled to the edge of shutdown, their presence erased from every known method of detection. Across the system, in the heart of the Draylen flagship Vathar Ascendant, Grand Admiral Severin paced before the forward display. The past hours had been wrong. The human resistance, though fierce, had been hollow in ways he could not articulate. The fleets they had destroyed had fallen too easily. Their movements lacked the unpredictable edge the old archives had hinted at, if those archives had ever been true. A junior Draylen tactician, his emerald black scales dulled with unease, stepped forward and bowed slightly. "My lord, deep spectrum gravimetric sweeps have returned. Anomalies. Consistent, faint but persistent. They are not debris, they are arranged." Severin's crest lifted slightly. Location. Beyond the 8th planet, above the ecliptic plane, the pattern suggests intent. We have also reanalyzed all combat logs. None of the human ships we have engaged so far carried biological signatures. Not a single one. The words fell like a lead weight. On the Vulcor command dais to the left, Captain Varesh shifted uncomfortably. his four clawed hands gripping the rail. They were unmanned, all of them. They were puppets, the Quarmech said flatly, controlled from somewhere else. A ripple of unease passed through the Allied commanders. This was not the war they thought they were fighting. They had not been striking at humanity's throat, only shadows of its outstretched hand. Severin's voice cut through the murmurs. Deploy stealth probes to the anomaly coordinates. Confirm, then report. 6 Black Dart probes slid from the Ascendant's launch bays, their drives whisper quiet under triple-layered cloaking. They accelerated into the darkness, bound for the high-orbit zone beyond Neptune. One by one, their return feeds began to flicker. Brief static, a half-frame of distorted light, and then silence. No debris returned, no trace. On the bridge, the Volcor captain's crest bristled in frustration. "They've anticipated us." Then came the navigation officer's report, his voice pitched low as if speaking louder would make it worse. "Rearward sector is compromised. Gravity distortion field has formed across our retreat corridor. Mass and signature analysis indicates a barrier, not a natural formation." Severin turned sharply. "A minefield?" "No, sir. A wall." Every Allied officer on the command deck stiffened. "Artificial. Purpose-built to hold us." The sensor chief's console flared again. "Multiple large mass readings at the anomaly coordinates. Reactor activations detected. Numbers increasing exponentially. I count..." His voice faltered. "Hundreds." The main holomap changed, red icons blooming into existence in a widening arc. They began as scattered points, easy to dismiss as debris shifting under a passing gravity wave. But then the points multiplied, joining in lines, then curves, then a full closing ring. The first silhouette emerged from the dark, a human dreadnought, hull vast and jagged, drive plume burning cold blue as its fusion core surged from idle. Then another and another, each one aligning in deliberate precision, weapons tracking inward. Rows upon rows of heavy cruisers, missile frigates, carrier platforms, and battle barges unfolded from the black, their camouflage shedding like mist. The Quarmech's hands froze over his console. 10,000 capital signatures, he whispered. "All active." A younger Draylen officer stared at the display, his voice a strained rasp. "This is not a trap. This is an execution." On the Volcor bridge wing, Captain Varesh's gaze followed the slowly tightening noose. "They've been here the entire time," he said, more to himself than anyone else, watching us fight empty shells. The oldest of the Draylen Commodores leaned closer to Severin, his voice dry as bone. "Those readings are no error, my lord. That is a shadow, and it's alive." Panic began to bleed into the fleet-wide command net. The Tareshan formation broke first, their heavy carriers shifting to open space toward the barrier. The Volcor squadrons tightened defensive formations around their flagships. None of it mattered. The gravitational wall at their backs pulsed with silent strength, holding them like insects in amber. Back in the war room, Admiral Marcus Trent strode to Duhan's side, data slate in hand. "Full confirmation, sir. All units hot. Reaction time 0. Orders?" Duhan's gaze was fixed on the tactical display. The Draylen fleet encircled in a ring of unblinking red, every human ship's weapons locked. His voice came low, even. "Hold fire." Trent blinked. "Sir? Let them see it. Let them understand what's about to happen." Out past Neptune's shadow, the human Leviathan waited. 10,000 silent predators, engines humming now like the slow inhale before a strike. Every movement, every activation, every flicker of reactor fire was deliberate. In the command pits of the Draylen fleet, officers stared at their screens with the same sinking realization. They had never been the hunters. They had been the quarry since the first shot of this war. The first human dreadnought emerged from the black like a continent rising from the depths, its vast hull blotting out whole swaths of starlight. Then another followed, and another, until the space between Neptune's orbit and the Draylen fleet was thick with giants. 10,000 warships, their forms still shimmering faintly as the last wisps of their camouflage dissipated, aligned in a flawless encirclement. Every barrel, every railgun, every plasma coil swiveled inward. Torpedo hatches yawned open in perfect sync. Carrier bays exposed rank upon rank of strike craft, each one dormant but unmistakably ready. The sight alone was a weapon, an assertion of total dominance. On the bridge of the Vathar Ascendant, the Draylen command deck froze. It was the silence of prey that has finally seen the predator's teeth. The Vulkor gunnery chief, claws flexing over his console, broke first. "There is no breach in their line," he said, voice shaking. "We're sealed." Severin's scaled face betrayed nothing, but his crest stiffened. "Signal flanking squadrons. Find me a vector out." Commands rippled through the fleet. Engines roared, drives lit. Formations shifted in desperate searches for an opening. But every calculated escape route collapsed within seconds. The gravitational wall behind them pulsed again, stronger now, closer. This time it came not from deep space, but from the shadowed heart of the Saturn belt. There, hidden for weeks within the electromagnetic chaos of the planet's rings, a mixed detachment of human and Varelian craft, powered up as one. Their suppression array unfurled like an invisible net, expanding until it wrapped the entire Draylen fleet in a shimmering distortion. Across every alien warship, warp drives sputtered, coughed warnings, and fell silent. The option of flight simply vanished. Back aboard the Resolute, now revealed as the war room and flagship at the heart of the human Leviathan, Admiral Marcus Trent stood at General Doohan's side. Around them, the command deck was calm. No shouts, no frantic corrections. Just the steady cadence of status reports and positional locks as the encirclement tightened. "Outer ring compressing," Trent said evenly. Doohan's gaze never left the holomap. "Close every corridor. Hold fire." The trap sealed with surgical precision. Human destroyers slid into the narrow lanes between Draylen cruisers, their angular hulls blocking any sudden maneuver. Heavy battlecruisers advanced in overlapping wedges, armor so close the gleam of one ship's plating reflected in the other. Above and below the main plane, carrier groups arched inward like the jaws of some great beast, their fighter bays still closed, reminding the enemy that the final step had not yet come. Inside the Ascendant, the comm channels were bedlam. Vulkor captains barked conflicting orders, Taretian gunners demanded firing solutions, and Cormec sensor officers shouted over one another about impossible target locks. "Every weapon they have is tracking us," one cried. "All of them, simultaneously, and they're not firing." Severin's voice lashed across the chaos. "Enough! We will—" A Vulkor Commodore cut him off, voice raw. "We will what? Our warp is gone, our lines are broken, and they are closing to boarding range." The human line halted at exactly 3 kilometers from the Draylen ships. The geometry was absolute, a perfect sphere of steel, firepower, and intent. On every tactical display aboard the alien vessels, targeting brackets glowed steady crimson. Doohan leaned forward slightly in the war room. "Open a channel." Across the void, the Draylen bridge heard the voice, deep, level, and without ornament. "You will power down all weapons and engines. You will prepare for boarding." The words settled over them like a weight. Officers glanced toward Severin, waiting for defiance. But in that moment, surrounded and cut off from every path, even the Draylen admiral felt the cold inevitability pressing in. His gaze swept the displays, human ships forming the ring, the suppression field shimmering at the edge of sensors, the absence of any exploitable weakness. The silence stretched until finally a comms officer, voice stripped of arrogance, spoke into the channel. "We request formal terms of surrender." In the Resolute's long command corridor, the news passed faster than the signal itself. Veteran officers, men who had watched the first strikes of this war, met each other's eyes, their expressions a mixture of satisfaction and long-delayed justice. 500 years, one murmured, almost reverently. And they finally remember who we are. On the portside viewing deck, Varelian operatives stood alongside human crew, silent witnesses to the moment. Many of the Varelians' shifting, glass-like eyes shimmered with emotion they did not try to conceal. Kalen, the oldest among them, stood beside Captain Mercer. He exhaled slowly, lids closing, not in relief, but in the solemn acknowledgement of a cycle completed. Around the Draylen fleet, the human sphere held steady. No gun fired, no hull was breached. Not one enemy fell to flame or steel in that final moment, because none needed to. The victory was already absolute, and everyone in that frozen pocket of space knew it. The moment the Draylen transmission confirming their surrender reached the Resolute, General Robert Doohan gave a single, short nod. No cheers erupted on the command deck, no victorious roar. The silence was deliberate, heavy, a quiet that carried more weight than any celebration could. Around the galaxy, fleets, stations, and worlds that had mocked humanity now waited to hear what the victors would say. Doohan stepped forward toward the main comm platform. The lighting was low, shadows drawn hard across his face, the projection feeds casting a cold blue onto his uniform. In every inhabited system, screens flickered and overrode local programming. The human general's image replaced all else. He looked directly into the lens. No preamble, no ceremony. "You spied on our moves," he said, voice steady and without strain. "You forgot we invented them." As the words echoed across the network, the feed shifted. A slow, unbroken pan across the void showed the defeated Draylen fleet. Their drives were dark, weapons powered down, hull lights extinguished. Human ships flanked them on every side, holding formation with surgical precision. Not a shot was fired, not a hull marred. They were prisoners of a battle that had never truly begun. The camera lingered on the Vathar Ascendant, its once proud fins scorched from suppression field turbulence, now towed in silence by two human dreadnoughts. On the alien flagship's dorsal hull, the Draylen crest was visibly blackened, a silent mark of their first defeat in centuries. The feed split into 3 windows. In one, human and Varelian engineers moved through the scorched corridors of orbital stations, working side by side. They pulled away melted panels, spliced severed conduits, and brought dormant systems humming back to life. In the next, wide shots showed Varelians, no longer wearing the guises they had hidden behind for centuries, directing power surges and calibrating defense grids, their true forms glinting like fractured crystal under emergency lights. On a second feed, civilian habitats that had gone dark during the Draylen sabotage lit up again, ring by ring. Doors unlocked, hydroponics bays cycled air, and gravity returned to drifting corridors. In one hangar, a human officer clasped forearms with a Varelian technician, their postures equal and unguarded. The third feed showed something different. The Yamamoto station's shattered remains, still orbiting Mars like a broken crown. The camera swept slowly across the wreckage until it settled on a section of the old command ring. Standing among the debris were 2 figures, a human naval commander in battle armor and a Varelian operative in a field suit. They faced each other, silent amid the drifting shards of the first human space command station. The Varelian extended his hand. The human took it without hesitation. The clasp held for several seconds, the image broadcast live to billions. No translation was offered. It needed none. Back in the main transmission, Doohan's voice returned. His gaze did not waver from the camera. "This is your history lesson. If you want something done, do it yourself." No music followed. No dramatic fade. The feed simply cut to black, leaving the galaxy staring into its own reflection, forced to remember the people it had dismissed, erased, and underestimated. In the aftermath, neutral systems flooded with private communications. Trade councils whispered about revising treaties. Military strategists reviewed every archived engagement with humanity, reassessing what had been dismissed as myth. On dozens of worlds, Alien citizens replayed the images of human and Varelian crews working together, many realizing for the first time that the war had never been just about Earth. It had been about truth and the cost of underestimating it. On the Resolute, the command deck remained quiet. Crew members returned to their stations, methodically preparing for the escort of the Draylen fleet to secured orbit. At the starboard observation bay, Admiral Marcus Trent stood beside Kalen. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Beyond the glass, the great ring of human ships began to break formation, their movements slow and measured, the precision itself a message to anyone still watching. For the Varelians, there was no return to shadows. Their marks now adorned human consoles, their names recorded in fleet logs, their loyalty sealed in the eyes of every soldier who had fought or waited for this moment. Some still bore the glimmer of their alien forms openly, walking the corridors of human ships as comrades, not infiltrators. Across the galaxy, the image of Duhan's cold stare and final words burned into memory. It was not just a warning, it was a reckoning. And for the first time in 5 centuries, no one looked at Earth with disdain. They looked at it with caution, and with the knowledge that if the humans came again, they would not come half-prepared. Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. Hope you had a great time with the story. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really makes a huge difference to the channel. And hey, I've got something else for you. I've chosen another story that I think you'll really enjoy. Just click the card right here, or hit this one to jump into the full playlist. See you in the next one.